tickled that we had 2 poems in a row about you babies. Like, that's a new one for us. So, should we go ahead and get to the
Yes, let's do it.
featured part of our presentation?
Yeah.
All right.
Cool. So our first featured artist this evening is Jeff Moyer, who we featured a few years ago, and we had a really great time. This time he has a family memoir called Grit, and we're really excited to hear it. Do you have any other thoughts? I know it's a really simple introduction, but
Yeah.
I'm really just excited to hear this stuff.
Yeah, I think we should just get out of Jeff's way.
All right. Cool. Oh, and the book is here, so.
Yes.
So
it's
yes,
available for sale.
Yes, the book is available for sale here tonight, one night on the long table. After Jeff is finished with his reading and his performance, he'll be back there to sign the book, so you can get your paid for and autographed copy.
Thank you. Can you bring me that water?
Yeah.
All right, let's see how we're doing. Volume?
Is everyone here?
Are we good on the volume?
Yeah, sounds
Yes?
good.
Good enough? Okay. Well, I'm going to be doing this trick of ear to mouth rather than reading eye to mouth. I'm listening and then saying what I'm hearing. And I have to keep up with the pace of it. And if I stumble, please forgive me. What I decided to read is, the book is called Grit, a family memoir on adversity and triumph. And it begins in 1954, the summer my brother was born with a severe cognitive disability. And at the same time, I was beginning to go blind from the measles. Just a second, let me get where I'm going here. Yeah. So my brother was born before the advent of any civil rights protection, and schools were able to say to him and my family, not him, not here. And the public school, there was an intermediary and a very kind kindergarten teacher that lived next door. So Mark went through 2 unsuccessful years in kindergarten, and then 6 violent weeks of first grade until he was tortured to the point that he said, "I will not go back." And they realized that the violence he was enduring in the neighborhood was beginning to result in him acting violently. As a result, they accepted the story that was told to them by the state of Ohio, that a state institution would provide a place where he would not be bullied, where he would learn a trade and get an education. And they institutionalized my brother when he was 8 years old. This happened when he was 16. I would always go and sing, do little concerts on his ward, this horrible medieval prison where he lived. But I decided I would actually do a concert. He joined me on stage, and it was a magical evening. The 2 of us performing together. This is after that. The phone rang in my communal California home. My mother spoke in phrases broken by choking sobs of the deepest sorrow. Days after our joyous concert at the Columbus State Institution for the Mentally Retarded, Mark had tried to run away from the institution, and he'd been apprehended and taken back by police. Mark was in a lockdown prison unit in the institution, and my mother needed me. Someone needed to go to Columbus, visit Mark, and find out what was happening. She choked and cried as I overflowed with compassion for her and with dread about Mark's situation. Would I be able to come back? She said that she and Dad could not handle the trip. 18 hours later, I sat on an American Airlines flight from San Diego to Cleveland. My folks picked me up at the airport. We had dinner, and after a night's sleep, I was on a bus to Columbus. From the Greyhound bus terminal, I walked to the familiar corner of Broad and High Street across from the state capitol. I boarded the Broad Street bus and got off across from the front gate of the hated institution. I was given directions to the building that held my brother. A hard-faced, talkative attendant opened the series of locked doors leading to Mark's cell. He told me about what I'd only feared. Police, using an attack dog, apprehended Mark on the sidewalk down the street from the institution. He said that Mark was a tough customer and it hadn't been pretty. His reference implied the force that must have been required to subdue Mark. Mark was in a locked, narrow cell with a heavy metal door. The attendant opened the final door. I entered and he slammed it heavily behind me. It was 2 p.m. and Mark lay unconscious from a bludgeoning dorsiflorazine. From the light from the small window in the, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to pick up there, I lost my way. Light from the small wire embedded window in the cell door shone down on the colorless square of pale daylight onto Mark's shoulder. It was the only light in the small room. The darkness of the prison cell pressed in and graduated in shades of shadowed gray. Mark was 16. He breathed heavily in his drug-induced midday sleep. I touched my brother's shoulder in the gloom of the prison afternoon. Mark stirred and then snapped into a fear-filled reflex. He was coming up in jerky spasms out of the coma of beatings and druggings. He cried out, "Ah, ah, ah!" "It's okay, Mark," I intoned gently. I held him, trying to ease his terror and my shock. "It's me, Jeff," I said in a low voice. "You're all right. Everything is okay." Mark pulled back, and for the first time, I saw his face in the faded daylight. It was sickening. Purple, black bruises covered his eyes and his cheeks. Deep gouges striped his face, neck, and arms. The swelling of his beaten face was so extreme that I would not have recognized him. Mark's mask of injuries told the story of the repeated beatings that he had endured. My brother's eyes rolled in their sockets as he dragged himself into consciousness. Then he focused on me. He grabbed me, buried his head in my shoulder, and sobbed. He cried deep and long and as hard as a man cries when the floor of hope has been ripped away. I could do nothing but hold him and brace myself against the pull of the emotional undertow that sucked me toward its black hole, the bottomless swirl of pain, the familiar heartache of shared responsibility, my long absences, and my inability to meet his needs combined. My own little brother suffered in the grim pathos of prison for what crime? Mark cried for a long time. He had been sleeping in his clothes. He groggily sat on the side of the bed and put on his ill-fitting shoes. I wasn't sure what he wanted, but I thought that we might at least get outside. I yelled for the attendant. As the steps approached, Mark gripped me as fear tightened his muscles. Please, I asked, is it okay if we take a little walk? Where do you plan to go? The attendant narrowed his eyes. Just outside, I responded. He grunted his begrudging consent, and we followed him to the chicken wire web light of the hallway. He unlocked the third door, and we started walking through the complex of institutional buildings. Mark led the way as we moved wordlessly toward his intended goal. Just a few weeks before, I had been there as a hero, a musical philanthropist, a welcomed anonymous star. Mark led me into the newish building where the gymnasium was housed. He pushed the elevator button, and we wordlessly rode down to the lower level. The door opened, and Mark led us through the empty, darkened hallway, lit only by emergency signs. He shuffled into the auditorium, and I set up 3 metal folding chairs from a stack against the wall. We sat down in the quiet of the place where just weeks before we had held the stage and brought joy and music to so many. The only illumination was from a 40-watt ghost light that shone dimly from the stage. Mark was so drugged that he leaned immediately against my shoulder and slipped into unconsciousness. I pulled him gently down into my lap, and he lay across the folding chairs and slept. I stroked his hair lightly, avoiding his battered face. Time slowed to a crawl. I slept as well. After some period of time, I awoke. I awakened Mark and told him that it was time for me to leave. He pulled himself to his feet, and we shuffled out of the gym. We retraced our steps back down the hallway to the elevator to another level and made the long walk back through the maze of dreary buildings. We knocked on the lock-up's outside door, and after a minute, the attendant turned the key in the heavy door, and we were ushered into the prison building. Doors were unlocked, and Mark and I moved down the long hallway through gray daylight. We were escorted to the door of Mark's cell, and we entered as the attendant waited in the hall. I helped Mark take off his shoes and his pants. I turned back the rough bedding, and he lay down. I laid the covers over him, and he fell again into the dreamless sleep of drunk blackout. I tucked him in and whispered goodbye. I left my younger brother under the penitential supervision of the white uniformed attendant with a flat top, long sideburns, and mean eyes. I could imagine how after the concert, Mark had been flying high. For a while, he might have been pumped. Perhaps there were other teenagers and young adults in the institution who were jealous and angry about the special attention Mark had received. Maybe to bring him back to reality, a few of them grabbed him and began to beat him up. It might have happened during one of the 15-minute breaks when they were allowed outside. I can imagine how Mark might have kicked and scratched and broken away from his tormentors. Running through the freshly mown lawn in the late summer, he made it to the main gate. He wasn't gone long. Minutes later, a policeman with a German shepherd cornered and grabbed Mark on the sidewalk, not far from the front gate. Mark's hysteria at the sight of the snarling and snapping dog likely brought on the club and the fist to subdue him. Mark was delivered back to the attendants, and it was then their turn. As was the practice, when someone had run away, they really worked him over and then injected him with a chemical blackjack, repeated regularly to ensure that he would be knocked out for days. After finding the administration building, I told the receptionist that I was looking for the office of whoever was responsible for Mark's care. I was directed to the psychiatrist's office on the second floor. The office was painted the uniform institutional light green with a layer of brown dirt and a residue of years of cigarette smoke. The doctor's grim middle desk was piled high with file folders, several files over a foot high. A large metal ashtray overflowed in the middle of his desk. He sat amid the low file folder towers, lethargically smoking an acrid cigarette that burned close to the filter. In a very tired voice, he told me that he was responsible for 900 individuals. that he wasn't treating anybody. He was just providing crowd control. He paused and stared dully out the window. He said that he remembered Mark because of his recent police involvement. Without checking any records, he reported that Mark was receiving 800 milligrams of Thorazine daily. He said that he might have recognized Mark by sight, regardless of his recent interaction with this case, but that generally he saw each of his 900 patients only once a year. I was looking for someone that could change Mark's circumstances, but he seemed like just a terribly overworked guy without the resources to bring any quality of life to the miserable souls with whom he was charged. More than 2,000 people were crowded together in the institution's wards. 3 times a day, they shuffled through the regimented trip downstairs for meals, and when the weather was good, 15 minutes in the yard. But now, Mark was in the hole, locked in solitary confinement for an indefinite period. In just days, Mark's life had fallen from the joyful celebrity of our concert performance to confinement as the lowest among the low. The psychiatrist did not apologize for his work, but radiated a bone-deep weariness. He had no illusions about his purpose or capability. I thought about how different his work life was from what he might have imagined during his years of preparation to be a healer. I went back to Cleveland with a heavy heart. In the quiet of the finished basement of my parents' home that had been my bedroom, I wrote the lyrics to a song that captured my despair. And now I'll play that brief song. Let's see how I do this. What is there for me to say? We both know where it stands. I can't stay, you can't go. There are shackles on our hands. We're brothers close in spirit, and I hear your message clear. And I've come to say there is no way to get you out of here. Son of Leo, naked rage, frustration on the run. I know you're aching as my own, but nothing can be done. If I could break these shackles that tie up time and space, oh, I'd free us both from bondage, and I'd find a quiet place where we could live as family, whole and well and free. And if there is truth or a living God this time will come to be, you shall be free. It took 26 years, but 26 years after that, I did fulfill that promise, and I did give Mark a home in the community where he lived joyfully for 20 years till his death in 2014. The advocacy required to sustain anyone quality of life is great. Supported living is about support. And I'm very glad that I lived in a time when the disability rights movement, of which I was a part, was able to change laws, get regulations passed for 504, an IDEA, and eventually the ADA. And the Olmsted decision brought down the